Hi, my beautiful and loving family. Welcome back again for another loving and heartwarming gathering at Mr. Peter Story's family. My heart overflows with pure joy to see all of you here today, my cherished readers. Each time we come together to share these precious moments, I feel blessed by the love and warmth that connects our souls. Your presence makes our story circle complete. Before we begin, let us join in a heartfelt prayer. Beloved Heavenly Father, thank you for blessing us with this beautiful gathering of hearts. Fill us with your divine love and purity as we share stories that touch souls and celebrate the precious gift of love you have given us. Guide our words to inspire hope and kindle joy in every heart present here today. Amen. My dear family, I want to share the glow of love still warming my heart from Valentine's Day. Seeing my beloved Binta in her white wedding dress took my breath away. She was radiating such pure beauty, looking even more gorgeous than when I first fell in love with her 30 years ago. The way her eyes sparkled with timeless love made my heart soar with gratitude for the blessing of sharing my life with such an angel. Would you like to hear the story of how Binta and I met? How love gave a shy man the courage to win the heart of the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Every moment is treasured in my heart, and I would be honored to share this special tale with my beloved story family. Please leave a gentle yes in the comments if you'd like to hear our love story. And tell me, are you still here with your family member, Mr. Peter? And how did you celebrate Valentine's Day? I'm very curious about your surprise, and I love surprises. Share your Valentine's Day experience with us. We are one family. Now, shall we open our hearts and begin today's heartwarming story together? The morning sun painted golden streaks across the polished mahogany of Will Young's desk as he methodically arranged his financial reports into perfect stacks. The sound of his fountain pen scratching against paper filled the otherwise silent office, a peace soon to be beautifully disrupted. The corporate finance department of Sterling and Associates had always been his sanctuary, a place where numbers made sense and social interaction was minimal. At 32, Will had mastered the art of blending into backgrounds, of speaking volumes through spreadsheets rather than words. His carefully ordered world shifted the moment Grace Berry swept through his office door. The marketing department's newest director arrived like a summer storm, unexpected, powerful, and impossible to ignore. The sharp click of her heels against marble floors announced her presence before she appeared, each step a prelude to the symphony of energy she brought with her. Mr. Young. Her voice carried the warmth of honey and sunshine. I'm Grace Berry, the new marketing director. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Will's breath caught in his throat as he looked up. Grace stood in his doorway, her presence commanding, yet inviting. Her business attire was impeccable, a deep blue dress that spoke of professionalism while hinting at the vibrant spirit beneath. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence and something more, a hint of mischief that made his heart skip a beat. No interruption, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, his hands trembling slightly as he gathered his papers into a neater pile. Grace moved with natural grace, settling into the chair while pulling out a tablet filled with marketing proposals. I've been reviewing our quarterly projections, and I have some ideas I'd love to run by you. The numbers are promising, but I think we could push them further with the right strategy. Will found himself drawn into her orbit as she spoke, her enthusiasm infectious. She didn't just present ideas, she painted pictures with words, turning dry marketing concepts into vivid stories of possibility. Her hands moved expressively as she talked, punctuating each point with elegant gestures that seemed to dance in the morning light. What do you think about increasing our digital presence? She asked, leaning forward slightly. The movement sent a subtle wave of her perfume across his desk. something light and floral that reminded him of spring gardens. Will swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the numbers rather than the way her eyes seemed to capture the sunlight. The ROI calculations. He began softly, then cleared his throat and tried again. The return on investment for digital marketing has been trending upward. Grace's smile brightened, encouraging him to continue. Unlike others who often grew impatient with his quiet nature, she seemed genuinely interested in his careful analysis. When he pulled up detailed spreadsheets, she moved her chair closer to better see his monitor, bringing with her that intoxicating combination of perfume and natural warmth. "These projections are fascinating," she said, leaning close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder near his. "You have such an eye for detail, Mr. Young." "Will," he corrected automatically, surprising himself with the informality. "Please, call me Will." Her smile in response was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Will," she repeated, and somehow his name in her voice sounded like music. "I think this is the beginning of a wonderful partnership." The meeting stretched from its scheduled 30 minutes into nearly 2 hours, their discussion flowing from marketing budgets to company strategy to their shared vision for the future. Will found himself speaking more than he had in months, drawn out of his shell by Grace's genuine interest and encouraging responses. She had a way of making silence comfortable, letting his thoughtful pauses breathe instead of rushing to fill them. As Grace gathered her materials to leave, she paused at his door. "You know, Will, I think we balance each other perfectly. Your careful analysis and my creative energy, we could make magic happen." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Will could only nod, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't express. As she turned to leave, the sunlight caught her figure in profile, creating a halo effect that burned itself into his memory. The soft curve of her neck, the confident set of her shoulders, the way her dress moved with each step, every detail etched itself into his mind. Long after she left, her presence lingered in his office like a phantom perfume. Will sat at his desk, staring at the space she had occupied, replaying every moment of their interaction. His usually ordered mind was in chaos, numbers and spreadsheets forgotten in favor of remembering the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, how her laugh seemed to fill every corner of the room with warmth. That evening, Will stayed late at the office, ostensibly to finish his reports, but really to process the whirlwind that had swept through his carefully ordered world. The setting sun painted his office in shades of amber and gold, reminiscent of the warmth Grace had brought into his space. For the first time in years, the silence of his office felt empty rather than peaceful. He found himself walking past the marketing department on his way out, pausing briefly to look at her nameplate on her office door. Grace Berry, Marketing Director, in simple gold letters that somehow failed to capture the vibrancy of the woman they represented. Through her office window, he could see she was still working, her face illuminated by her computer screen as she concentrated on some late-night project. As if sensing his presence, she looked up, catching his eye through the glass. Instead of showing surprise or embarrassment at being caught looking, Will found himself returning her warm smile with one of his own. She waved, a small gesture that somehow contained the same energy as her grand presentations, and he felt his heart skip another beat. Walking to his car in the darkened parking garage, Will realized his world had shifted on its axis. The comfortable silence he had wrapped around himself for years suddenly felt constricting rather than protective. Grace's presence had awakened something in him, a hunger for connection he had long denied. That night, as he lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, Will's thoughts kept returning to Grace. The way she moved, the sound of her voice, the infectious energy she brought into every room. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering what it would be like to let someone past his carefully constructed walls. His dreams that night were filled with blue dresses and dancing hands, with laughter that sounded like music and eyes that held the warmth of summer. In his sleep, he was eloquent and bold, capable of expressing the emotions that tied his tongue in knots during waking hours. He dreamed of conversations that flowed like rivers, of connection without fear, of the possibility that lay in tomorrow's sunrise. When his alarm clock broke through his dreams the next morning, Will found himself looking forward to going to work for the first time in years. He spent extra time choosing his tie, smoothing his hair, preparing himself for the possibility of another chance encounter with Grace. The shy accountant who had been content to fade into the background was gone, replaced by a man who dared to hope for something more. The morning sun streamed through his office windows, painting the world in the same golden light that had illuminated their first meeting. Will opened his laptop, but instead of immediately diving into his spreadsheets, he found himself looking toward the marketing department, wondering what new whirlwind of energy Grace would bring into his life today. He didn't have to wonder long. As if summoned by his thoughts, a familiar click of heels echoed down the hallway, growing closer with each step. Will's heart began to race, his carefully ordered world about to be beautifully disrupted once again by the force of nature that was Grace Berry. The financial reports lay forgotten on his desk as he waited for his office door to open, for the next chapter of his life to begin. In the moment before she appeared, Will realized that some disruptions were worth every moment of chaos they brought. Sometimes the most beautiful symphonies began with a single, unexpected note. And as Grace appeared in his doorway once again, radiant in the morning light, Will knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The quiet man who had hidden behind numbers and spreadsheets felt something shift inside him. A desire to become more, to reach out, to risk the comfort of silence for the promise of something extraordinary. "Good morning, Will," Grace said, her voice carrying the warmth of 1,000 sunrises. "I hope you're ready for another exciting day." In that moment, as their eyes met across his suddenly too small office, Will realized he was ready for anything, as long as it involved the remarkable woman standing in his doorway, preparing to turn his world upside down in the most beautiful way possible. Chapter 2. Unexpected Attraction. Days at Sterling and Associates took on new meaning for Will Young as he found himself increasingly drawn into Grace Berry's orbit. Every morning, his eyes would drift to his office door, anticipating her arrival. The quiet accountant who once found solace in solitude now found himself seeking reasons to venture into the marketing department, his heart racing with each encounter. Grace noticed his subtle changes. The way he'd started leaving his office door open, how he lingered longer during their budget meetings, the slight smile that would grace his lips whenever she entered the room. She found his shy demeanor endearing, a contrast to the confident businessman who usually surrounded her. There was something pure about the way he blushed when their eyes met across the conference room, something genuine in his carefully chosen words. One rainy evening, as most employees hurried home, Grace found herself working late on a crucial presentation. The office was nearly empty, the sound of rain against windows creating a peaceful atmosphere. She had removed her blazer, her silk blouse catching the soft glow of her desk lamp. The subtle scent of her perfume mingled with the petrichor drifting through her slightly opened window. Will, also working late, found himself drawn to the light from her office. He stood in her doorway, momentarily transfixed. Grace sat there, illuminated by the warm light, her hair slightly disheveled from running her fingers through it in concentration. She looked up, catching him watching her, but instead of embarrassment, he felt a surge of courage. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible above the rain. Grace's smile lit up the dimmed office. "I'd love some," she replied, standing and stretching slightly. The movement caused her blouse to shift, revealing a graceful collarbone. Will felt his breath catch in his throat. They walked together to the break room, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Will's hands trembled slightly as he prepared their coffees, acutely aware of Grace's presence behind him. She had perched herself on the break room counter, her feet dangling playfully. The informal setting made her seem more accessible, more real than the polished professional he usually saw. "How do you take yours?" he asked, proud that his voice remained steady. "Sweet, like my personality," she teased, causing a blush to creep up his neck. As he handed her the coffee, their fingers brushed momentarily. The contact sent electricity through both of them, causing Will to nearly drop the cup. Grace steadied his hand with hers, the touch lingering longer than necessary. "You know," she said softly, "I've been watching you too." Will's heart thundered in his chest, so loud he was certain she could hear it. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, creating an intimate atmosphere in the otherwise silent building. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace set her coffee down and slid off the counter, moving closer to him. "You don't always have to say anything, Will. Sometimes silence speaks volumes." The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Will could smell her perfume, could see the subtle flecks of gold in her brown eyes. His usual shyness warred with an overwhelming desire to reach out and touch her. Thunder rumbled outside, and Grace jumped slightly, instinctively moving closer to him. Will found his arms around her before he could think, steadying her. The warmth of her body against his sent his mind reeling. "I should probably head home soon," Grace murmured, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "The storm's getting worse." "Let me walk you to your car," Will offered, surprising himself with his boldness. They gathered their things in comfortable silence, the storm creating a cozy bubble around them. As they walked through the parking garage, Grace shivered in the cool air. Without hesitation, Will removed his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was simple but intimate. Grace pulled the jacket closer, inhaling his scent, a mixture of coffee, cologne, and something uniquely Will. They reached her car too soon, both reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you for the coffee," Grace said, turning to face him. "And the jacket." Will stood there, rain dripping from his hair, making him look younger and more vulnerable. Grace reached up to brush a droplet from his cheek, her touch sending shivers through him that had nothing to do with the cold. "Grace, He started, his voice thick with emotion. She waited patiently, her hand still resting on his cheek. Will struggled to find the words to express the turmoil in his heart, the way she had upended his carefully ordered world. "It's okay," she whispered, understanding in her eyes. "We have time." Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, her lips warm against his rain-cooled skin. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity, the sound of rain fading away, until all Will could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Grace slipped into her car, leaving Will standing in the rain with the phantom warmth of her kiss on his cheek. He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the stormy night. His hand touched the spot where her lips had been, still tingling from the contact. The next morning, Will arrived at work earlier than usual, his mind replaying the previous evening's events. He found his jacket hanging on his office door, perfectly pressed, with a note tucked into the pocket. "Thank you for making a rainy evening magical. G." The simple note sent his heart racing again. He carefully folded it and placed it in his wallet, a tangible reminder that the previous night hadn't been a dream. Throughout the day, their eyes met across meetings and hallways. each glance charged with new meaning. Grace's smile seemed softer, more intimate when directed at him. Will found himself standing straighter, speaking with more confidence, drawn out of his shell by her gentle encouragement. During lunch, Grace stopped by his office with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought I'd return the favor," she said, setting one on his desk. "Sweet, like your heart." Will's face flushed at her words, but he didn't look away. Instead, he held her gaze, allowing himself to really look at her. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a radiance about her, an inner light that seemed to fill every room she entered. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, surprising them both. Grace's face lit up with joy. "I thought you'd never ask." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of anticipation. Will found himself unable to focus on his spreadsheets, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Grace. He caught himself smiling at random moments, earning curious glances from his colleagues. As the workday drew to a close, Will gathered his courage and walked to Grace's office. She was packing up for the day, her movements graceful and purposeful. The setting sun painted her in shades of gold and amber, reminding him of their first meeting. "Ready?" she asked, her voice soft with anticipation. Will nodded, unable to trust his voice. They walked together to the elevator, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The simple contact sent sparks through his body, making him acutely aware of her presence. In the elevator, Grace moved closer, ostensibly to adjust his slightly crooked tie. Her fingers brushed against his chest, and Will forgot how to breathe. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words and barely contained desire. "You know," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've never met anyone quite like you, Will Young." Will found his hand moving of its own accord, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, tender, and spoke volumes about his growing confidence around her. "I've never met anyone who makes me want to be more than I am," he replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The elevator doors opened, breaking the moment, but something had shifted between them. As they walked to their cars, their hands brushed against each other, neither pulling away. The simple contact felt more intimate than any kiss. That evening marked the beginning of something profound, something that would change both their lives forever. The shy accountant and the vivacious marketing director had found something rare and precious in each other. A connection that transcended words, a chemistry that defied explanation. As they parted ways to drive to the restaurant separately, both knew that their lives had irrevocably changed. The attraction between them was no longer unexpected. It was inevitable, powerful, and beautiful in its simplicity. Will watched Grace's car pull away, his heart full of emotions he couldn't yet express, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of these feelings. With Grace, silence wasn't a shield, but a space where love could grow, where hearts could speak without words. The night air was cool against his skin, but Will felt warm from within. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and change, but for now he savored the memory of her smile, the ghost of her touch, and the promise of what was to come. Chapter 3. The Beginning. The Italian restaurant Will had chosen for their first date was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, its warm lights casting a golden glow through stained glass windows. He arrived early, his heart pounding with anticipation as he waited outside. The evening air was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the restaurant's garden. Grace arrived in a stunning red dress that made Will's breath catch in his throat. The fabric flowed around her like liquid fire, catching the light with every movement. She had let her hair down, dark waves cascading past her shoulders, so different from her usual professional style. Will found himself transfixed by the way a loose curl danced against her neck in the breeze. "You look Will started, his voice failing him as she drew closer. The familiar scent of her perfume mingled with the evening air, making his head spin. "So do you," Grace replied with a warm smile, appreciating how handsome he looked in his carefully chosen charcoal suit. She noticed he'd taken extra care with his appearance, his hair slightly tousled in a way that made her fingers itch to run through it. Inside, the restaurant was intimate and romantic. Their table was set in a quiet corner, candlelight dancing across the white tablecloth. Will pulled out Grace's chair, his hand brushing against her bare shoulder as she sat. The contact sent electricity through both of them. "I've never seen you so nervous," Grace said softly, as Will settled across from her. Not even during board presentations. Will managed a small smile, his fingers fidgeting with the stem of his water glass. "This matters more," he admitted quietly. The honesty in his voice touched Grace deeply. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his restless fingers. The warmth of her touch steadied him, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, letting the connection between them grow. Their conversation flowed easily over dinner, moving far beyond their usual work discussions. Grace discovered that Will had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable, while Will found himself mesmerized by the way Grace's eyes lit up when she talked about her passions. She told him about her dreams of transforming the company's marketing approach, and he shared his secret love of classical music. "I never would have guessed you play the piano," Grace said, leaning forward with interest. "You'll have to play for me sometime." The thought of performing for her made Will's chest tight with anxiety, but the warmth in her eyes made him want to try. "Maybe," he said softly, "if you promise to dance for me." Grace's delighted laugh drew the attention of nearby diners, but Will didn't notice. He was too captivated by the way her happiness seemed to illuminate her from within. The candlelight caught the gold flecks in her eyes, making them sparkle like stars. As they finished their meal, neither wanted the evening to end. The restaurant had begun to empty, but they lingered over their wine, lost in conversation and the growing intimacy between them. "Would you like to take a walk?" Will suggested, surprising himself with his boldness. "There's a nice park nearby." Grace's smile was answer enough. As they left the restaurant, she slipped her hand into his, intertwining their fingers. Will marveled at how perfectly their hands fit together, how natural it felt to walk with her in the evening air. The park was peaceful at night, lit by ornate lampposts that cast pools of soft light along the winding paths. The sound of a nearby fountain provided gentle background music to their stroll. Grace shivered slightly in the cooling air, and Will immediately removed his jacket, draping it over her shoulders, just as he had that rainy evening at the office. They stopped at a small bridge overlooking a pond, where moonlight danced on the water's surface. Grace turned to face Will, still wearing his jacket, her eyes soft with emotion. "I've never met anyone like you," she whispered, echoing her words from the elevator, but with new depth. "You see me, Will. Not just the confident exterior, but all of me." Will's hand trembled slightly as he reached up to touch her face, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You make me want to be brave," he confessed, his voice barely audible above the sound of the fountain. Grace leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The air between them grew thick with anticipation, the world narrowing down to just this moment. Just them. Will leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Instead, Grace met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that started soft and tentative, but quickly deepened with shared passion. Her hands slid up his chest to his shoulders, while his free hand found her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss seemed to last forever and end too soon. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Will rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he committed every detail of the moment to memory, the softness of her skin under his fingers, the warmth of her body against his, the way her breath mingled with his in the small space between them. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you walked into my office," Grace admitted, her voice husky with emotion. Will opened his eyes to find her watching him with such tenderness it made his heart ache. "I've been wanting to be worthy of you since that day," he replied. Grace's hand came up to cup his cheek, her touch infinitely gentle. "You already are." They walked back to their cars hand in hand, stopping frequently to share soft kisses and tender touches. Each moment felt precious, each touch a new discovery. When they reached Grace's car, she turned to face him one last time. "Thank you for tonight," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become intimately familiar. "For showing me your heart." Will caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, causing her breath to catch. "Thank you for helping me find it." That night, as Will lay in bed replaying every moment of their evening together, he felt something shift inside him. The quiet man, who had hidden behind spreadsheets and silence, was transforming, becoming someone who could match Grace's passion with his own. In her own apartment, Grace stood at her window, still wearing Will's jacket, wrapped in his scent and the memory of his kisses. She touched her lips, still tingling from his touch, and smiled into the darkness. The man who had captured her attention with his shy glances had captured her heart with his gentle soul. The next morning at the office, everything was different, yet exactly the same. They maintained their professional demeanor, but their eyes met across meetings with new understanding. Their fingers brushed when passing documents, each touch carrying the echo of the previous night's passion. During lunch, Will found a note slipped under his office door. "Last night was perfect. Dinner at my place tomorrow. I promise to only kiss you a little bit. G." His response, left on her desk in his precise handwriting, made her laugh out loud. "I make no such promises." Their colleagues noticed the change in them. How Will stood taller, spoke more confidently in meetings, how Grace's smile seemed to glow brighter when he was in the room. But no one could guess the depth of the connection growing between them, the way their hearts beat in sync, even when apart. As the day drew to a close, Will found himself standing in Grace's office doorway, watching her gather her things. She looked up and smiled, that special smile that was just for him, and his heart skipped a beat. "Ready to go home?" she asked softly. "Only if you let me kiss you goodnight in the parking garage," he replied, surprising both of them with his playfulness. Grace's delighted laugh echoed through the empty office. "Mr. Young, are you flirting with me?" "Always," he admitted, holding out his hand to her. As they walked to their cars, fingers intertwined, both knew that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. The shy accountant and the vivacious marketing director had found not just love, but a chance to become more together than they ever could be apart. In the dim light of the parking garage, their goodnight kiss was both a promise and a celebration. A promise of more beautiful moments to come, and a celebration of the love that had begun to bloom between them, as natural and inevitable as the changing of seasons. Will watched Grace drive away, his heart full of emotions he was finally learning to express. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new chances to grow together, but for now he savored the memory of their first real date, the softness of her lips, and the knowledge that their story was just beginning. Chapter 4. 3 years of love. Their first year together unfolded like pages in a treasured book, each day revealing new chapters in their love story. Will and Grace's contrasting natures created a beautiful harmony, her vibrant energy drawing him out of his shell, while his quiet strength gave her a safe harbor in life's storms. Spring brought picnics in secluded corners of city parks, where Grace would spread colorful blankets and fill the air with her infectious laughter. Will watched her with quiet adoration, memorizing every detail of how she moved, how she spoke, how she made the world brighter just by existing in it. One particularly memorable evening, Grace convinced Will to join her for an impromptu dance in the rain. While he initially hesitated, her joy was infectious. She took his hands, pulling him into a slow waltz as thunder rumbled overhead. "You're crazy," he whispered, but his eyes shone with love. "Only about you," she replied, pressing rain-sweetened kisses to his lips. Their first summer together saw them exploring hidden beaches and secret coves. Grace wore a red bikini that made Will's heart race, though he could only express his appreciation through tender touches and heated glances. She understood his silence, reading the desire in his eyes as she emerged from the waves like a siren from ancient myths. During one sultry evening at her beach house, Grace stepped onto the moonlit balcony, wearing only Will's dress shirt. The thin white fabric turned nearly transparent in the moonlight, revealing tantalizing glimpses of her curves. Will's breath caught in his throat at the sight. "Join me," she called softly, extending her hand. Will moved to her as if drawn by an invisible force. His fingers trembled as they traced the curve of her shoulder, slipping beneath the collar of his shirt. Grace's skin was still warm from the sun, silk smooth under his touch. "You're beautiful," he managed to say, the words carrying all the emotion he struggled to express. Fall painted their world in rich colors that matched the deepening of their connection. Will found himself opening up more, sharing parts of himself he'd kept hidden from everyone else. Grace treasured these moments when his quiet exterior would crack just enough to let her see the passion within. Their first Christmas together brought a week-long vacation in a mountain cabin. Snow fell outside while they created their own warmth within. Grace decorated every inch of space with twinkling lights and garland, while Will watched in contented silence. One evening, as they lay before the fireplace, Grace wearing a silken nightgown that reflected the dancing flames, Will surprised her by speaking from his heart. "You make everything brighter," he said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Before you, my world was all shades of grey." Grace turned to him with tears in her eyes, knowing how much it cost him to express himself so openly. She kissed him deeply, pouring all her love into the gesture. Their second year brought new challenges and triumphs. Grace's career soared as she revolutionized their company's marketing strategy. Will supported her silently but steadfastly, his quiet presence a constant source of strength. One particularly stressful evening, Grace came home exhausted from a difficult presentation. She found the apartment transformed, soft music playing, candles flickering, and a bath drawn with rose petals floating on the surface. Will helped her undress with reverent hands, his touch expressing all the love and support he couldn't put into words. As he washed her hair, his strong fingers massaging away the tension of her day, Grace felt tears of gratitude slip down her cheeks. "How do you always know exactly what I need?" she whispered. Will pressed a kiss to her shoulder in response, his silence more eloquent than words. Spring returned, bringing their second anniversary. They celebrated at the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. Grace wore red again, a different dress, but the same effect on Will's pulse. His eyes followed her every movement, drinking in the way the fabric hugged her curves. Later that night, in their candlelit bedroom, Grace slowly undressed for him. Will's heart thundered so loudly he was sure she could hear it. His hands clenched the sheets as each piece of fabric fell away, revealing more of her sun-kissed skin. "Touch me," she whispered, and Will's control finally broke. Their lovemaking that night was more passionate than ever, his actions expressing everything his words couldn't. Grace reveled in these moments when his quiet exterior gave way to raw desire. Their third year together saw them growing even more attuned to each other. Will could read Grace's moods in the set of her shoulders while she learned to understand the emotions hidden behind his silence. During a summer heat wave, they spent weekends at Grace's beach house. Will found himself mesmerized by the way she moved in the water, her body cutting graceful lines through the waves. At night, they would walk along the shore, the moon turning her skin to pearl. One evening, Grace emerged from the ocean wearing a white swimsuit that clung to her curves. Droplets of water traced paths down her skin that Will ached to follow with his fingers. His breath caught as she approached, her hips swaying hypnotically. "You're staring," she teased, running her fingers through her wet hair. Will pulled her close, not caring that her wet skin soaked through his clothes. His kiss expressed everything he couldn't say, how beautiful she was, how much he desired her, how completely she had captured his heart. Autumn arrived again, marking nearly 3 years together. While Will remained quiet in his affections, Grace had learned to read the depth of his love in his actions, the way he always held doors for her, how he remembered every detail she mentioned in passing, the tender way he held her at night. One rainy Sunday, they stayed in bed until noon, wrapped in each other and soft sheets. Grace wore one of Will's t-shirts, the material slipping off one shoulder in a way that made his pulse race. Her shorter hair was tousled from sleep, making her look young and vulnerable. Will traced the curve of her collarbone with gentle fingers, his touch saying more than words ever could. Grace caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "I love how you love me," she whispered. "Even in your silence, I can feel it." These moments of perfect understanding made Will's heart swell. Though he struggled to express himself verbally, Grace always seemed to know exactly what he was feeling. As their 3rd anniversary approached, both felt the shift in their relationship. Their love had deepened beyond the initial attraction, becoming something profound and unshakable. Will's quiet devotion complemented Grace's expressive nature, creating a balance that made them both better. Yet beneath the surface, Grace began to yearn for more. While she treasured Will's silent love, part of her longed for the passionate declarations she read about in romance novels. She wanted to hear the words that she knew lived in his heart. Will sensed her growing restlessness, but didn't know how to bridge the gap between his reserved nature and her need for expression. He tried to show his love through actions, surprising her with her favorite flowers, leaving notes in her purse, holding her close at night, but sometimes actions weren't enough. Their love story had reached a crossroads. 3 years of deep, abiding love had brought them to a point where they needed to decide if his quiet devotion and her expressive passion could find a lasting harmony. As autumn leaves fell around them, Grace made her decision. If Will couldn't find the words to take their relationship to the next level, she would. Their love was too precious to wait for him to overcome his reserved nature. Their story had more chapters yet to be written. But these first 3 years had laid a foundation of love strong enough to weather any storm. Through silence and sound, through passion and peace, they had built something beautiful together. The quiet accountant and the vivacious marketing director had found in each other something rare and precious, a love that transcended words, a connection that grew stronger with each passing season. Their journey was far from over, but their hearts beat in perfect synchronization, creating a rhythm all their own. Chapter 5. The Proposal. 3 years of love had filled Grace's heart with certainty. She knew Will was her forever, but his shy nature meant he might need years more to work up the courage to propose. As she lay beside him one morning, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across his sleeping face, she made her decision. Grace Berry would take matters into her own hands. Planning the perfect proposal became her secret mission. She wanted it to be as unique and special as their love story. For weeks, she worked behind the scenes, coordinating with their closest friends and making arrangements that would surprise even the detail-oriented Will. The autumn evening she chose was perfect, crisp and clear, with a harvest moon hanging low in the sky. She had told Will they were attending a charity gala at the art gallery where they'd first met, knowing he would dress in his best suit. What he didn't know was that the gallery was empty, except for a trail of memories she had carefully crafted. Grace left their apartment early, claiming she needed to handle some last-minute details. In reality, she needed time to transform the gallery into a testament to their love. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged everything, her heart racing with anticipation. Will arrived precisely on time, looking devastatingly handsome in his tailored black suit. He paused at the gallery entrance, confused by the darkness within. As he stepped inside, soft lights illuminated one by one, creating a path through the exhibits. The first display stopped him in his tracks. There, perfectly lit, was a painting of the moment they first met. Grace bursting into his office, Will looking up from his desk with that mixture of surprise and intrigue. She had commissioned it from a talented local artist who had captured every detail, from the sunlight streaming through his office window to the slight blush on Will's cheeks. Beside the painting was a handwritten note in Grace's elegant script. The moment my heart recognized its home. Will's breath caught as he moved to the next display. Here was a collection of photographs. Their first date at the Italian restaurant, dancing in the rain, quiet moments at the beach house. Each image was accompanied by a note describing the memory from Grace's perspective, revealing how deeply she had treasured each moment. The third display made him smile, a recreation of their first kiss on the bridge, complete with a miniature fountain and twinkling lights that mimicked the stars from that night. The note here read, "Where silence spoke louder than words." As Will moved through the gallery, each display revealed another chapter of their love story. Grace had thought of everything. The piano where he'd first played for her, the beach blanket from their midnight swims, even the coffee cups from their morning rituals. His heart pounded as he realized what this might mean. The trail of memories led him deeper into the gallery, each step bringing him closer to their future. In the final room, soft music began to play, the piece he had performed for her on their first anniversary. The lights slowly brightened to reveal Grace standing in the center of the room, wearing a dress that took his breath away. Deep blue silk flowed around her like water, catching the light with every movement. Behind her was their most recent photograph, enlarged to fill the wall. In it, they were looking at each other with such love that it made Will's heart ache. Below the photo was an empty frame with a question mark. Grace moved toward him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Will Young," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 3 years ago, you changed my life by being exactly who you are. A man whose quiet strength and gentle heart complete me in ways I never knew I needed." She took his hands in hers, feeling them tremble slightly. "You've taught me that love doesn't need grand gestures or constant words to be real. You've shown me that the most profound connections can be found in comfortable silences and small moments." Will's eyes glistened as Grace continued, "I don't need you to change or become more expressive. I love you exactly as you are, your shy smiles, your thoughtful pauses, the way you show your love through actions rather than words." Grace sank gracefully to one knee, never breaking eye contact. From a hidden pocket in her dress, she produced a platinum band that caught the light like captured starlight. "I'm not asking you to be different," she said softly. "I'm asking you to be mine forever, exactly as you are. Will Young, will you marry me?" The silence that followed was perfect, one of those moments where words were unnecessary. Will pulled Grace to her feet and into his arms, his kiss answering more eloquently than words ever could. When they finally parted, both had tears in their eyes. Will touched his forehead to hers, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "Yes, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Grace slipped the ring onto his finger with hands that shook slightly. It fit perfectly, just like they did together. I have something for you too, Will said softly, reaching into his pocket. Grace's eyes widened as he produced a delicate diamond ring. I've been carrying this for months, trying to find the perfect way to ask. You beat me to it. Grace laughed through her tears as Will slid the ring onto her finger. Great minds think alike, she teased. They stood there in the gallery surrounded by the evidence of their love story, holding each other close as their hearts beat in perfect synchronization. How did you do all this? Will asked, gesturing to the elaborate displays. Grace smiled, running her fingers through his hair. I had help. Turns out quite a few people have been rooting for us. As if on cue, their friends and family emerged from hiding places throughout the gallery, filling the space with cheers and congratulations. The empty gallery transformed into an impromptu engagement party, complete with champagne and music. Will held Grace close as they danced, marveling at how she had turned their love story into an art exhibition. Each display showed not just their memories, but her understanding of him, how she had chosen to propose in a way that honored both their personalities. I can't believe you planned all this, he murmured against her hair. Grace smiled up at him. I learned from you that the most meaningful gestures are the ones that come from understanding someone's heart. Later that night, after their friends had gone and the gallery was quiet once more, Will and Grace walked through the displays again. They stopped at each one, adding new memories to the ones Grace had so carefully curated. At the final display, where the empty frame still hung, Grace produced a camera. Ready to fill that frame? Will pulled her close, more confident than she had ever seen him. Ready to start our next chapter. The photograph they took captured everything. Their joy, their love, their promise of forever. Grace knew it would be perfect for the empty frame, marking the moment their love story entered a new phase. As they left the gallery hand in hand, the harvest moon still hanging low in the sky, both felt the perfection of the moment. Their engagement, like their love, was a beautiful blend of their personalities, Grace's bold expressiveness and Will's quiet depth. Take me home, Grace whispered, leaning into Will's embrace. Will kissed her softly, pouring all his love into the gesture. We are home, he replied, wherever we're together. They drove home through the quiet city streets, their joined hands resting between them, new rings catching the light of passing street lamps. The night had been perfect, a proposal that honored their past while celebrating their future. At their apartment, Will swept Grace into his arms before she could protest, carrying her across the threshold as if practicing for their wedding day. Her laughter echoed through the hallway as she wrapped her arms around his neck. I love you, she said simply, looking into his eyes as he set her down. Will's response was to kiss her with all the passion he had learned to express over their years together. Their engagement night stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. They had begun as opposites, the shy accountant and the expressive marketing director. Now they were perfect complements, each making the other more complete. Their proposal story, like their love, was uniquely their own, a beautiful blend of bold gestures and quiet devotion. The empty frame in the gallery would soon hold the image of this perfect moment, but the real masterpiece was the love they had built together, a love strong enough to last a lifetime. Chapter 6. Marriage and Expectations. Their wedding day dawned perfect, a midsummer morning with soft clouds drifting across a robin's egg sky. Grace stood before the full-length mirror in her bridal suite, her heart fluttering with anticipation. The wedding dress she had chosen was a masterpiece of silk and lace, flowing around her like captured moonlight, Will waited at the altar, his hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. The garden venue they had chosen was intimate, decorated with thousands of white roses and twinkling lights that would shine as evening approached. When the music began and Grace appeared at the end of the aisle, Will forgot how to breathe. She moved toward him like a dream, each step bringing them closer to their forever. Will's eyes never left her face, memorizing every detail of this moment. The way sunlight caught in her veil, the soft flush of her cheeks, the love shining in her eyes. Their vows were a perfect reflection of their personalities. Grace's were eloquent and expressive, painting pictures with her words as she promised to love Will for all their days. Will's were shorter but no less meaningful, his voice steady as he pledged his heart to her. The reception was magical, with dancing under the stars and champagne flowing freely. Grace's laugh rang out often, bright and joyful, while Will found himself smiling more than he ever had before. They danced their first dance to the same song he had played for her on their first anniversary, now performed by a string quartet. That night, in their honeymoon suite, Will carried Grace across the threshold. She had changed into a silk nightgown that made his pulse race, the material clinging to her curves in ways that tested his control. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a perfect beginning to their married life. The honeymoon took them to a private villa in the Mediterranean, where they spent sun-drenched days exploring ancient cities and moonlit nights exploring each other. Grace loved how the relaxed atmosphere brought out a more playful side of Will, while he adored seeing her surrounded by such beauty. But as summer faded into autumn and their daily routines resumed, subtle changes began to surface. The first signs were small, barely noticeable shifts in their dynamic that grew more pronounced with each passing month. Grace found herself craving more romantic gestures, more verbal expressions of love. While Will's quiet devotion had once seemed enough, she now longed for the kind of passionate declarations she read about in books or saw in movies. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Grace watched Will methodically arranging his clothes for the next day. His movements were precise, controlled, just like everything else about him. She felt a familiar frustration building in her chest. "Tell me you love me," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Will looked up, surprised. "You know I do," he replied softly, his standard response. Grace sighed, running her fingers through her hair in frustration. "That's not the same as saying it, Will. I need to hear the words sometimes." He crossed the room to her, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I love you," he whispered. But even as he said it, Grace felt it wasn't enough. She wanted passion, spontaneity, the kind of romance that swept you off your feet. Their first major argument as a married couple came 3 months after the wedding. Grace had planned an elaborate anniversary celebration, a recreation of their first date with additional romantic surprises. Will, overwhelmed by a major project at work, had forgotten the date entirely. "I can't believe you forgot," Grace's voice echoed through their apartment. 3 months isn't that long to remember, Will." "I've been stressed with work," he defended quietly. "You know how important this project is." "More important than our marriage." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Will tried to reach for her, but Grace pulled away. "That's not fair," he said, his voice strained. "You know you mean everything to me." "Do I?" Grace challenged. "Because sometimes it feels like I'm the only one trying to keep the romance alive in this marriage." The argument ended like most of their disagreements, with Will retreating into silence and Grace feeling more frustrated than ever. They made up later that night, but something had shifted between them, a hairline crack in their perfect facade. As winter settled over the city, Grace found herself increasingly dissatisfied with Will's reserved nature. She longed for grand, romantic gestures, for passionate declarations of love. Will, sensing her discontent but unsure how to fix it, withdrew further into himself. Their intimate moments became less frequent, weighted down by unspoken expectations. Grace missed the electricity of their early days together, the way Will's quiet passion had once made her feel like the most desired woman in the world. One night, after another silent dinner, Grace decided to try something different. She changed into the lingerie she had saved from their honeymoon, a delicate creation of black lace that left little to the imagination. Will's sharp intake of breath when she entered their bedroom gave her hope. "Do you want me?" she asked, her voice husky with desire. Will's eyes darkened as they traced her curves, but his response was typically restrained. "You're beautiful," he said softly. Grace felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes. "That's not what I asked, Will. I need to hear how you feel, what you want. I need passion, not politeness." The evening ended with Grace sleeping in the guest room for the first time, leaving Will alone with his thoughts and regrets. The distance between them grew wider with each passing day, their love story threatening to become a tragedy of unmet expectations. Spring arrived, bringing with it their first wedding anniversary. Will tried his best to be more demonstrative, planning a romantic dinner and presenting Grace with a thoughtfully chosen gift. But even as she smiled and thanked him, both could feel that something was missing. Grace's friends noticed the change in her. The radiant bride of last summer had been replaced by a woman who seemed constantly on edge, waiting for something that never came. Will's colleagues saw it too, the way his quiet confidence had given way to a more pronounced withdrawal. Their second major fight came after a dinner party with friends. Grace had watched enviously as another couple shared casual displays of affection throughout the evening, stolen kisses, whispered endearments, constant touching. "Why can't you be more like that?" she demanded once they were home. "Why is it so hard for you to show affection in public?" "I'm not him," Will replied, an edge of frustration in his usually calm voice. "I thought you loved me for who I am." "I do love you," Grace said, her voice cracking. "But sometimes I need more than quiet devotion. I need passion, Will. I need to feel desired, cherished, wanted." The night ended in tears and silence, another crack in their foundation. As Grace lay awake in their bed, Will's steady breathing beside her, she wondered if love alone was enough when expectations remained unfulfilled. Summer returned, bringing with it memories of their perfect wedding day. But now, a year later, the magic of that day seemed like a distant dream. Grace found herself longing for the shy accountant who had surprised her with his quiet intensity, while Will struggled to understand how his love had become insufficient. Their love was still there, burning steady beneath the surface, but it was increasingly overshadowed by the weight of unmet expectations and unspoken desires. As their first year of marriage drew to a close, both Grace and Will faced an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes love needs more than just existence to survive. It needs expression, demonstration, and the courage to bridge the gap between what is and what could be. Chapter 7. Growing Tensions. The cracks in their marriage began small, almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in fine china. Each day brought new moments where Grace's need for expression collided with Will's reserved nature, creating fissures that grew deeper with time. One morning, Grace stood before their bedroom mirror, preparing for an important presentation. She wore a new dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her shorter hair styled to frame her face. Will watched her from their bed, his heart racing at her beauty, but his lips remained sealed. "Do I look all right?" she asked, turning to face him. "You look nice," he replied softly, the words falling far short of the admiration burning in his chest. Grace's shoulders slumped slightly. "Nice," she repeated, the word tasting bitter. just nice. Will wanted to tell her how the dress made his pulse quicken, how her beauty took his breath away, how proud he was to call her his wife. But the words remained locked inside him, prisoners of his own nature. That evening, Grace came home to find Will working late in their home office. She changed into a silk nightgown, one that she knew he loved, hoping to draw him away from his spreadsheets. The material whispered against her skin as she moved, catching the lamplight like liquid moonlight. Will looked up as she entered, his breath catching at the sight of her. The silk clung to her curves, revealing more than it concealed. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could see the pulse fluttering in her throat. "Join me in bed?" Grace asked, her voice soft with invitation. Will's hands tightened on his desk. "I need to finish this report," he managed, though every fiber of his being screamed to go to her. Grace stood there for a moment longer, hurt and frustration warring in her eyes. Then she turned and left, the silk nightgown flowing around her like water, leaving Will alone with his regret. Their intimate moments became fewer, weighted down by unspoken expectations. Grace longed for passionate declarations, for spontaneous displays of desire. Will's quiet appreciation, once enough to make her feel cherished, now felt lacking. During a dinner party at their friend's home, Grace watched enviously as the host pulled his wife into an impromptu dance, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed with delight. Will sat quietly beside her, his hand resting motionless on her knee. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Grace's frustration finally boiled over. "Why can't you be more like that?" she demanded, pacing their bedroom. "Why is it so hard for you to show affection, to be spontaneous?" Will stood frozen, watching her move like a caged tiger. She was beautiful in her anger, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with emotion. The silk robe she wore slipped off one shoulder, revealing skin that he ached to touch. "I'm not him," Will said quietly. "I can't be someone I'm not." "I'm not asking you to be someone else." Grace's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm asking you to show me what you feel, to let me see that you want me, that you desire me, that you love me." She untied her robe, letting it fall open to reveal the nightgown beneath. Will's control slipped as his eyes traced her curves, but still he remained rooted in place. "Look at you," Grace whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Even now, when I'm practically begging for your touch, you just stand there. Are you made of stone?" Will took a step toward her, his hands reaching out, but she backed away. "Don't," she said. "Don't try to fix this with silent touches and gentle gestures. I need more than that. I need passion, Will. I need to feel desired, cherished, wanted." The night ended with Grace sleeping in the guest room for the first time, leaving Will alone with his thoughts and regrets. The space between them grew wider with each passing day, their love threatening to suffocate under the weight of unmet needs. A week later, Grace tried one last time to bridge the gap between them. She had bought new lingerie, black lace that made her feel beautiful and desirable. She spent extra time preparing, making herself perfect for him. When Will came home, he found their apartment transformed. Candles flickered everywhere, casting romantic shadows on the walls. Grace stood in the center of their living room, the lace clinging to her curves, her eyes filled with hope and invitation. Will's breath left him in a rush. She was stunning, a vision of beauty that made his heart race and his hands tremble. He could hear her breathing, could see the rapid pulse in her throat, could smell her perfume mixed with the candle smoke. "Do you want me?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Will's response was typically restrained. "You look beautiful." Grace's face crumpled. "That's not what I asked, Will. I need to hear how you feel, what you want. I need passion, not politeness." She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. The lace stretched across her back, revealing glimpses of skin that made Will's control waver. But still, he couldn't find the words she needed to hear. The final breaking point came during their anniversary dinner. Grace had made reservations at an intimate restaurant, hoping to rekindle the spark between them. She wore red. The color she knew drove Will crazy, her dress cut to emphasize every curve. Throughout dinner, she watched other couples sharing casual touches, whispered endearments, stolen kisses. Will sat across from her, quiet and composed, his appreciation locked behind walls of reserve. "Tell me you love me," Grace said suddenly, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You know I do," Will replied, his standard response. Grace pulled her hand away as if burned. "That's not enough anymore," she whispered. "Knowing isn't the same as hearing it, feeling it, seeing it in your actions." They left the restaurant early, the tension between them thick enough to cut. At home, Grace changed out of her dress with sharp, angry movements. Will watched her from the doorway, his heart aching at the distance between them. "I can't do this anymore," Grace said finally, her voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending that this is enough, that your silence doesn't kill me a little more each day." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I need a husband who can match my passion, who isn't afraid to show the world how he feels. And you need someone who can appreciate your quiet ways." The word they both dreaded hung unspoken between them. Divorce. The end of their love story, the admission that sometimes love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gap between two different hearts. Will stood there, emotions churning inside him with no way to express them. He wanted to tell her how his heart raced every time she entered a room, how her smile still made him dizzy with love, how the thought of losing her was like losing the air from his lungs. But the words wouldn't come. They stayed locked inside him, prisoners of his reserved nature as he watched the woman he loved slip further away. That night, they slept in separate rooms for the first time since their wedding. The silence between them was no longer comfortable. It was a void filled with all the words Will couldn't say, all the passion he couldn't express. Their love story, which had begun with such promise, seemed to be ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. The quiet accountant and the vivacious marketing director had reached an impasse where love alone wasn't enough to sustain them. As Will lay awake in their bed, listening to the sounds of Grace moving around in the guest room, he wondered if he could change, if somewhere inside his quiet exterior there might be the passion she so desperately craved. But for now, the silence stretched between them like an endless chasm, threatening to swallow their love whole. Chapter 8. Breaking Point. 3 days after Grace left, she returned to their apartment to collect more of her things. The sound of her key in the lock made Will's heart race, hope and fear warring in his chest. He had barely slept during her absence, their bed feeling impossibly empty without her presence. Grace stepped into their home, looking both familiar and strange. She had changed her hair, cutting it shorter in a way that emphasized her elegant neck. The sight of her made Will's breath catch. She was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "I just need to grab some files for work," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And a few more clothes." Will nodded, unable to trust his voice. He watched as she moved through their space, noting how she avoided looking at the photos of their happier times that lined the walls. Her scent, that familiar mixture of perfume and something uniquely Grace, followed her through the apartment, torturing him with memories. As she packed, Will stood in the doorway of their bedroom, fighting the urge to reach for her. Grace pulled clothes from their shared closet, her movements quick and efficient, as if lingering would be too painful. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, still facing the closet. "Maybe we should make this official." The word hung between them. Divorce. Such a small word to represent the end of everything they'd built together. Is that really what you want? Will's voice was barely audible. Grace turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What I want is a husband who can match my passion, who isn't afraid to show the world how he feels, who can make me feel desired and cherished, not just cared for. I do desire you, Will protested softly. I cherish every moment with you. Then why can't you show it? Grace's voice rose with frustration. Why do I always have to be the one who reaches out, who shows affection, who makes the grand gestures? She moved closer to him, her perfume enveloping him in memories of happier times. Do you know what it feels like to always be the one giving more, to feel like your love is somehow too much, too loud, too demanding? Will struggled to find the words to express the depth of his feelings. My love isn't less just because it's quiet. But it's not enough, Grace's control finally broke. I'm tired of feeling like I'm performing a monologue instead of being in a relationship. I'm tired of wondering if you feel anything at all behind that composed exterior. She ran her fingers through her newly shortened hair, a gesture of frustration that made Will's heart ache with familiarity. I need more than this, Will. I need passion, expression, life. Sometimes I wonder if you're even capable of those things. The accusation stung. That's not fair, Will said, his voice carrying an edge of anger that surprised them both. Isn't it? Grace challenged. When was the last time you lost control? When was the last time you let yourself feel something so strongly you couldn't contain it? She moved even closer, her eyes locked with his. When was the last time you wanted me so badly you couldn't think straight? Will's hands clenched at his sides, his carefully maintained control threatening to slip. Grace was close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat, could smell the subtle changes in her perfume as it mixed with her growing agitation. You're not even denying it, she said bitterly, because you can't. You're not capable of that kind of passion. Something inside Will snapped. In 2 quick steps, he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face as he kissed her with all the passion he'd kept contained. Grace gasped against his mouth, surprised by the sudden intensity. For a moment, she melted into him, her body remembering the countless times they'd found solace in each other's arms. But then she pushed him away, tears streaming down her face. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Don't try to fix this with one desperate gesture. It's too late for that. Will stepped back, his brief loss of control already being replaced by his usual reserve. The moment of passion had come too late, serving only to highlight what had been missing from their marriage. I think we should agree to a divorce, Grace continued, wiping away her tears. But I need some time to find a new place. Could I stay in the guest room for a month, just until I can make arrangements? The request felt like the final nail in their marriage's coffin. Will nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The thought of having Grace so close yet so far away was torture, but he couldn't deny her this last request. We should set some ground rules, Grace said, her professional voice taking over. Separate schedules for the kitchen, bathroom. We should try to avoid running into each other as much as possible. Each word was another crack in Will's heart, but he maintained his composure. Whatever you think is best. Grace gathered her things, preparing to leave again. At the bedroom door, she paused. I did love you, Will. More than I've ever loved anyone. I just can't live with someone who can't love me the way I need to be loved. After she left, Will sat on their bed, surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume. His hand reached out to touch her pillow, the fabric still holding the impression of where she used to sleep. The apartment felt impossibly large and empty, without her presence filling it with life. Will moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching things that reminded him of their life together. The piano where he'd first played for her, the photographs from happier times, the coffee mug she always used. That night, he lay awake in their bed, listening to the sounds of Grace moving around in the guest room. Such a small distance separated them physically, but emotionally, they might as well have been on different planets. As moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, Will finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was happening. Their love story, which had seemed so perfect at the beginning, was ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. Suffocated by his inability to express the depth of his feelings, Grace's words echoed in his mind. "I need passion, expression, life." She deserved those things, deserved a love as vibrant and expressive as she was. Will had thought his quiet devotion would be enough, that she would always understand the depth of his feelings, even when he couldn't express them. But now, facing the reality of losing her, he wondered if she had been right all along. Maybe some feelings were too important to keep quiet. Maybe some loves needed to be shouted from rooftops rather than whispered in the dark. The next morning, they passed each other in the hallway like strangers, both pretending not to notice how the other had barely slept. Their carefully choreographed avoidance began: separate breakfast times, different routes through the apartment, silence where there had once been conversation. Will watched Grace from a distance, noting how she seemed both stronger and more fragile. Her new haircut emphasized the determined set of her jaw, but he could see the shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Each day brought them closer to the end of their marriage, each silence another step toward their final goodbye. The weight of things left unsaid hung between them like a heavy curtain, separating them even when they occupied the same space. Their love story was ending not because they had stopped loving each other, but because sometimes love needs more than just existence to survive. It needs expression, demonstration, and the courage to break through walls of reserve and fear. As Will lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet sounds of Grace preparing for sleep in the guest room, he wondered if it was too late to become the man she needed. If somewhere inside his quiet exterior there might be the passion she so desperately craved. Chapter 9. The Agreement. The first week of their separation unfolded in a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Their once shared apartment became a maze of invisible boundaries and scheduled absences, each space holding memories that made their hearts ache. Grace claimed the guest room as her temporary sanctuary, moving her essential belongings with mechanical precision. Each item she removed from their shared spaces left a visible void: her toothbrush missing from the master bathroom, her favorite coffee mug absent from the kitchen cabinet, her perfumes no longer lining their dresser. Will watched from doorways as she dismantled their life together, piece by piece, the sight of her packing away her clothes, each garment a memory of moments they'd shared, made his chest tight with unspoken words. Their mornings became a careful ballet of timing. Grace would wake early, preparing her coffee and breakfast before Will emerged from their bedroom, his bedroom now. The scent of her morning routine would linger in the air, torturing him with its familiarity when he finally ventured out. Will took the evenings, cooking simple meals. He ate alone at the kitchen counter, trying not to remember the dinners they'd shared at their dining room table. The sound of Grace moving in the guest room during these times made his heart ache with each footfall. 3 days into their separation, the careful boundaries they'd established faced their first test. Will came home early from work to find Grace's car already in the parking garage. He considered waiting in his car until she finished whatever she needed to do, but the thought felt cowardly. As he entered their apartment, the sound of running water from the guest bathroom stopped him in his tracks. Steam escaped from under the door, carrying with it the familiar scent of Grace's shower gel, something floral and exotic that had always made his pulse quicken. Will should have retreated to his room, maintained their careful distance. Instead, He found himself rooted to the spot as the water shut off. Moments later, Grace emerged, wrapped in nothing but a towel, water droplets still clinging to her bare shoulders. She froze when she saw him, one hand clutching the towel closer to her chest. Her newly shortened hair was wet, curling slightly at the ends. A single drop of water traced its way down her neck, disappearing beneath the towel in a way that made Will's mouth go dry. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other. Grace's skin was flushed from the hot shower, giving her a glow that made his fingers itch to touch her. Her eyes, wide with surprise, held his with an intensity that made his heart race. Will could hear her breathing, slightly faster than normal, could see the pulse beating rapidly in her throat. The air between them crackled with tension, part memory, part desire, part pain. Her scent, intensified by the steam, filled the hallway, making him dizzy with want. Grace adjusted her grip on the towel, the movement causing it to slip slightly lower. Will's control, always so perfect, began to crack. He took an involuntary step forward, drawn by the magnetic pull that had always existed between them. "Don't," Grace whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes, dark with emotion, betrayed her own struggle with their proximity. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Will could see goosebumps rising on her arms, could hear her heart beating almost as fast as his own. One more step, and he could touch her, could remind her body of all the ways they fit together perfectly. The ring of Grace's phone shattered the moment. She practically fled to the guest room, leaving Will standing in the hallway, surrounded by steam and the ghost of her presence, his hands clenched at his sides, his body humming with thwarted desire. That night, neither of them slept well. Will lay awake in their bed, tormented by the image of Grace in that towel, by the way her skin had glowed in the hallway light. In the guest room, Grace tossed and turned, her body remembering the heat in Will's gaze. The next few days saw them being even more careful to avoid each other. Grace left for work earlier, while Will lingered in the bedroom until he was sure she was gone. The apartment felt charged with unresolved tension, with all the things they couldn't say or do. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A week into their separation, a summer storm rolled in, bringing with it memories of all the times they had danced in the rain together. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Will was in the kitchen when darkness fell. He heard Grace's small gasp from the guest room, followed by the sound of her fumbling for something in the dark. Without thinking, he grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and moved toward her room. "Grace," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "In here," she replied, her voice small in the darkness. He found her by the window, illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. She had changed into her silk robe, the deep blue one he had given her for Christmas, and the material caught the dim light like water. Will's flashlight beam caught her in profile, highlighting the elegant line of her neck, the way the robe clung to her curves. She turned toward the light, and his breath caught in his throat. Lightning flashed again, turning her skin to pearl and making her eyes glitter like stars. "The power's out in the whole building," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I can get some candles from the kitchen." Grace nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's getting chilly without the air conditioning." Will wanted to wrap her in his arms, to warm her with his body heat, as he had done so many times before. Instead, he forced himself to turn away, to maintain the careful distance they had established. He returned with candles and matches, setting them up around the guest room. Each flame created a pool of warm light, casting Grace in a golden glow that made his heart ache. She looked like a Renaissance painting, all soft curves and dramatic shadows. Thunder crashed overhead, making Grace jump slightly. It was a reflex Will knew well. She'd always been startled by loud noises. His body moved on autopilot, taking a step toward her before he caught himself. Grace noticed the movement. Their eyes met in the candlelight, and for a moment all their carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble. She looked so beautiful, so familiar, yet somehow new in the flickering light. "Will," she whispered, his name carrying a weight of meaning in the darkness. He could hear her heartbeat, or maybe it was his own, pounding in the silence between thunderclaps. The robe had slipped slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder, and Will found his eyes drawn to that patch of exposed skin. Grace didn't fix the robe. Instead, she seemed to be holding her breath, waiting to see what he would do. The air between them grew thick with tension, with possibility, with years of love, and 1 week of separation. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, catching the tears that had begun to slide down Grace's cheeks. The sight broke something in Will's chest. Before he could stop himself, he crossed the room to her, his thumb brushing away a tear. The moment his skin touched hers, electricity that had nothing to do with the storm shot through them both. Grace leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. Will could feel her trembling beneath his hand. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but she made no move to pull away. Will knew she was right. This would only make their separation harder, would only add to their pain. But having her so close, feeling her skin under his fingers, smelling the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with rain-heavy air, it was more than his control could handle. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, sharing breath, sharing space, sharing the pain of their broken love. Grace's hands came up to rest on his chest, but whether to push him away or pull him closer, neither was sure. The storm raged outside their window, mirroring the tempest in their hearts. Each flash of lightning illuminated Grace's face, showing Will the conflict in her eyes, the same struggle between love and pain that he felt in his own chest. Thunder crashed again, closer this time, and the candles flickered in the resulting gust of wind from the window. The movement created dancing shadows across Grace's face, highlighting the vulnerability in her expression. "I should go," Will said, his voice barely audible over the storm. Grace nodded, but her hands fisted in his shirt, betraying her reluctance to let him leave. Will forced himself to step back, each inch of distance feeling like miles. He gathered the flashlight, leaving several candles for her. At the door, he turned back for one last look. Grace had returned to the window seat, her robe glowing blue in the candlelight. Her face turned toward the storm outside. She looked like everything he had ever wanted, everything he was losing because he couldn't express the depth of his feelings. The image burned itself into his memory. Grace in candlelight, beautiful and untouchable as a dream. That night, no one slept. The storm's fury matched the turmoil in their hearts as they lay in separate rooms, both acutely aware of the other's presence. The next morning would bring a new day, a new chance for Will to finally break free from his self-imposed prison of silence and show Grace the passion she so desperately craved. Chapter 10. The Transformation. The morning after the storm dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through windows still streaked with rain. Will woke early, his mind filled with images from the previous night, Grace in candlelight, the silk of her robe catching the storm's flashes, the vulnerability in her eyes as he touched her face. She had looked so beautiful, so achingly familiar, yet somehow new, that the memory made his heart race even now. The careful walls he'd built around his emotions had cracked during the storm, showing him glimpses of the passion he kept locked away. Will lay in bed, listening to the sounds of Grace's morning routine through the walls. The quiet domesticity of it, water running, drawers opening and closing, her soft footsteps, filled him with an overwhelming longing, not just for her physical presence, but for the freedom to express everything she made him feel. He heard her bedroom door open, followed by her familiar path to the kitchen. Usually, he would wait until she finished, maintaining their careful choreography of avoidance. But something had shifted during the storm, something fundamental in his soul. Will rose, drawn by an impulse he didn't try to resist. He found Grace in the kitchen, bathed in morning light that turned her shorter hair to spun gold. She wore a simple sundress that caught the breeze from an open window, the material dancing around her legs like butterfly wings. She turned at his approach, surprise evident in her widened eyes. The sunlight painted patterns on her skin through the gauzy curtains, making her glow like a Renaissance angel. Will's heart thundered in his chest as he took in every detail. The slight flush in her cheeks, the pulse beating rapidly at her throat, the way her lips parted slightly in anticipation. "Good morning," she said softly, uncertainty coloring her voice. Instead of his usual quiet response, Will moved toward her with purpose. Grace's eyes widened further as he approached, but she didn't step back. He could smell her morning shower on her skin, that intoxicating mixture of soap and her natural scent that had always driven him wild. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice deeper and more passionate than she had ever heard it. "You've always been beautiful, and I've been a fool for not telling you every single day." Grace's lips parted in shock at this unexpected declaration. Will could see the emotions playing across her face: hope, fear, desire, love. She was close enough now that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could hear the catch in her breathing. "Will," she started, but he wasn't finished. "I've kept everything inside for so long," he continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I've watched you shine, watched you light up every room you enter, and I've never told you how much it affects me, how much you affect me." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her tremble. "Every morning I wake up thinking about you. Every night I go to sleep with your smile in my mind. Even this week, knowing you were just down the hall but unreachable has been torture." Grace leaned into his touch, tears gathering in her eyes. Will's other hand found her waist, drawing her closer. The morning sun surrounded them in a golden halo, turning the moment almost dreamlike in its intensity. "I love your passion," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. "I love how you feel everything so deeply, how you express yourself so freely. I love watching you dance, watching you laugh, watching you live life with such intensity." His words, his touch, his newfound expressiveness overwhelmed Grace. She gripped his shoulders for support, her body swaying toward his like a flower seeking the sun. "Where has this been?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why haven't you shown me this side of you before?" Will's hands tightened on her waist. "I thought my love was enough on its own. I thought you could feel it in my silence, in my actions. I was wrong. You deserve to hear it, to feel it, to see it in every gesture and every word." He brought one hand up to tangle in her hair, tilting her face toward his. "You deserve a love as expressive as you are, and I'm done being afraid to show you how much I want you, how much I need you, how much I love you." Grace's eyes darkened with desire as Will's passionate words washed over her. This was everything she had wanted. His emotions laid bare, his love expressed openly and without reservation. He couldn't resist anymore. Will pulled her into a kiss that contained all the passion he had kept, contained for years. Grace melted into him, her body remembering every curve and plane of his. Her hands slid into his hair as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Will rested his forehead against hers, his hands still holding her close. "I've missed you," he whispered. "Every second of every day this week. I've missed you." Grace's fingers traced the lines of his face, exploring this new, expressive version of the man she loved. "Show me," she breathed. "Show me everything you've been holding back." Will didn't need to be asked twice. He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward their bedroom, not the guest room where she'd been staying, but their shared space where so many memories lived. The morning sun followed them, turning Grace's skin to gold as Will laid her gently on their bed. She looked up at him with trust and desire in her eyes, her sundress spread around her like petals of a flower. "You're so beautiful," he said again, his voice rough with emotion. "Let me show you how much I want you, how much I've always wanted you." Grace reached for him, pulling him down to join her. Their kisses grew deeper, more passionate, as years of contained desire broke free. Will's hands traced every curve of her body, relearning territory he had thought lost forever. The sundress slipped away easily, revealing sun-kissed skin that begged to be touched. Will took his time, showing Grace with actions and words how deeply he desired her. Every kiss was accompanied by whispered praise, every touch followed by expressions of love. Grace bloomed under his attention, her body responding to his newfound passion with increasing ardor. The morning sun painted them both in shades of gold and rose as they rediscovered each other. Their lovemaking was different than it had ever been before, more intense, more expressive, more complete. Will held nothing back, letting Grace see and feel every emotion that coursed through him. His quiet reserve had transformed into passionate devotion, and Grace reveled in every moment of it. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and sunlight, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Will's fingers traced patterns on Grace's bare shoulder as she curled against his chest. "I never knew you had this in you," she murmured, pressing a kiss over his heart. "It was always there," he replied, his voice still carrying that new depth of emotion. "I just needed to learn how to show it. You deserve nothing less than all of me, mind, heart, and soul." The rest of the morning passed in a haze of tender touches and passionate declarations. Will told Grace everything he had kept inside, how her smile made his heart race, how her laugh was his favorite sound, how watching her move filled him with desire. "Promise me something?" Grace asked, propping herself up to look into his eyes. "Anything," Will answered without hesitation. "Promise me you'll never hide your feelings again. Promise me you'll always let me see this side of you." Will pulled her down for a tender kiss. "I promise. No more walls, no more silence, no more holding back. You'll never have to wonder how I feel about you again." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, neither made any move to leave their sanctuary. The outside world could wait. This was their moment of transformation, of rediscovery, of love reborn from the ashes of almost loss. They had found their way back to each other through the storm, through the darkness, through the silence. Now, bathed in sunlight and newfound passion, they could begin again, stronger, deeper, more complete in their love than ever before. Will watched as Grace dozed in his arms, her skin glowing in the late morning light. He marveled at how close he had come to losing her, how his inability to express himself had nearly destroyed the best thing in his life. Never again, he promised silently, never again would he let his reserve stand in the way of showing Grace exactly how much she meant to him. She deserved a love as bright and expressive as she was, and he would spend the rest of his life giving her exactly that. Chapter 11. Rekindled Flame. The days following their passionate reunion took on a dreamlike quality. Will and Grace moved through their apartment in a dance of rediscovery, finding new ways to express their love in both grand gestures and quiet moments. The boundaries they had established during their separation dissolved like morning mist in the sunlight of their renewed connection. Will emerged from his shell completely, surprising Grace with the depth of passion he had kept contained for so long. One evening, she came home to find the apartment transformed, rose petals creating a path from the door to their bedroom, where Will waited with champagne and strawberries. "What's the occasion?" she asked, her heart fluttering at the romantic gesture. "You," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "Just you." Grace melted against him, still amazed by this new, expressive version of her husband. He had retained his quiet strength, but now wrapped it in passionate declarations and bold actions that took her breath away. That night, Will worshipped her body with a combination of tender care and unleashed desire that left them both breathless. The moonlight streaming through their windows painted Grace's skin in silver as Will traced every curve with reverent fingers. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against her skin. "Every part of you is perfect." Grace arched into his touch, her body responding to both his actions and his words. This was everything she had dreamed of, passion and tenderness combined in a way that made her feel completely cherished. Their days took on new rhythms. Will no longer held back his feelings, whether at home or in public. At work, he would surprise her with impromptu visits to her office, bringing her favorite coffee and stealing kisses that left her dizzy with desire. One afternoon, during a particularly boring meeting, Will passed her a note under the conference table. "You look stunning today. I can barely focus on these reports when you're sitting across from me looking like that." Grace felt her cheeks flush with pleasure at his words. The quiet accountant who had once communicated primarily through spreadsheets now wrote her love notes that made her heart race. Their evenings became adventures in romance. Will took dance lessons in secret, surprising Grace with his newfound skills during a romantic dinner at home. He pulled her into his arms as soft music played, leading her in a perfect waltz around their living room. "When did you learn this?" she gasped as he dipped her gracefully. "I've been practicing," he admitted with a smile. "I wanted to show you that I can match your passion in every way." Grace's eyes filled with happy tears as they swayed together in the dimming light. This was the man she had always known existed beneath the quiet exterior, romantic, passionate, completely devoted to making her happy. Their physical connection deepened with each passing day. Will's touch became more confident, more possessive, making Grace feel desired in ways she had only dreamed of. She would catch him watching her with dark eyes full of passion, and the heat of his gaze would make her weak in the knees. One morning, Grace emerged from the shower wrapped only in a towel, water droplets still clinging to her skin. Will's sharp intake of breath made her pause. "You look like a goddess," he said, his voice rough with desire. "Every time I see you like this, I fall in love all over again." Grace felt her body respond to his words, to the intensity of his gaze. The towel slipped slightly, revealing more skin, and Will's control snapped. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into a kiss that left them both breathless. They were late to work that morning, but neither cared. Their love had taken on a new dimension, passionate, expressive, completely uninhibited. Will's transformation wasn't limited to physical passion. He found ways to express his emotions in everyday moments, showing Grace the depth of his feelings through both words and actions. When she was stressed about a project, he would draw her a bath, complete with rose petals and candles. As she soaked in the warm water, he would read to her from her favorite books, his voice a soothing balm to her worried mind. During quiet moments, Will would tell Grace all the things he had kept inside for so long, how her smile brightened his darkest days, how her laugh was his favorite sound in the world, how watching her sleep filled him with a peace he had never known before. Grace flourished under his attention, becoming even more radiant with happiness. Her colleagues commented on her glow, on the way she seemed to float through her days, as if dancing to music only she could hear. Their love story, which had nearly ended in divorce, had instead transformed into something even more beautiful. The passion that had always simmered beneath the surface now flowed freely between them, creating a connection deeper than either had thought possible. One evening, as they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, Grace traced patterns on Will's chest with gentle fingers. "I always knew you had this in you," she whispered. "This passion, this fire. I just needed you to believe it too." Will pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You freed me," he replied. "Your love gave me the courage to break through my own walls." Their nights became a symphony of passion and tenderness. Will learned to read Grace's body like a beloved book, discovering new ways to please her, to show her exactly how much he desired her. Grace, in turn, reveled in Will's newfound expressiveness. She loved watching him lose control, loved knowing that she could break through his reserve and unleash the passion that had always lived beneath the surface. Their apartment, which had briefly become a battleground of silence and separation, transformed into a sanctuary of love and desire. Every room held memories of their reconnection, passionate embraces in the kitchen, tender moments in the living room, nights of endless love in their bedroom. Will surprised Grace with romantic gestures at unexpected moments. He would pull her into spontaneous dances in the grocery store, kiss her breathless in elevators, leave love notes hidden in her purse or coat pockets. Each gesture, each word, each touch was a testament to his transformation. The quiet man who had once struggled to express his feelings now showed his love freely and without reservation. Their colleagues watched in amazement as the once reserved CFO became more outgoing, more demonstrative in his affection for his wife. The office romance that had almost ended in tragedy instead became a story of transformation and renewed love. Grace fell in love with Will all over again, discovering new aspects of his personality that his reserve had kept hidden. His quiet strength remained, but now it was wrapped in passion and expression that matched her own vibrant nature. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, built on a foundation of understanding and acceptance. Will had learned to express his feelings, while Grace had learned to appreciate the quiet moments between passionate declarations. Together, they created a love story that was uniquely their own. A perfect blend of passion and tenderness, of grand gestures and quiet devotion. Their near divorce had led them to a deeper understanding of each other, a stronger connection that would last a lifetime. As they lay together one night, bathed in starlight and satisfaction, Grace looked at her husband with eyes full of love. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Will asked, trailing his fingers along her spine. "For showing me all of you, for trusting me with your passion, your heart, your soul." Will pulled her into a deep kiss that expressed everything he felt for her: love, desire, devotion, and gratitude. Their love had been tested by silence and separation, but it had emerged stronger, deeper, more complete. Will's transformation had not just saved their marriage, it had created something even more beautiful than before. The flame of their love, which had nearly been extinguished, now burned brighter than ever, illuminating their path toward a future filled with passion, expression, and endless love. Chapter 12. The Second Beginning. The day Grace was supposed to leave arrived like any other morning, sunlight streaming through their bedroom windows, painting their world in shades of gold. But this morning was different. This was the day they would choose their future. Will woke first, watching Grace sleep beside him, her shorter hair fanned across the pillow, her face peaceful in the early morning light. The past weeks had transformed their relationship, bringing them closer than ever before. The thought of her leaving, even though they had reconciled, made his heart clench painfully. Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open to find Will watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Since his transformation, his gaze had become more expressive, showing all the emotion he had once kept hidden. "Good morning," she whispered, reaching up to trace his jaw with gentle fingers. Will caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Stay," he said simply, his voice carrying all the love and passion he had learned to express. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she heard what he wasn't saying. "Stay forever. Stay and let me love you the way you deserve. Stay and let us begin again." "Are you sure?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Will pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair as he kissed her with all the passion he had discovered within himself. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've never been more sure of anything," he declared. "I love you, Grace Berry. I love your passion, your energy, your light. I love how you've taught me to express myself, how you've helped me break free of my own constraints." Grace's tears spilled over as Will continued, his voice strong and sure. "I want to marry you again. I want to stand before our friends and family and show them how much I love you. I want to make new vows, ones that I'll speak with all the passion you deserve." "Yes," Grace breathed, pulling him down for another kiss. "Yes to everything." They spent that morning planning their second wedding, their excitement building with each decision. This ceremony would be different from their first, more intimate, more expressive, a true reflection of their renewed love. The weeks leading up to their second wedding were filled with passion and joy. Will continued to surprise Grace with romantic gestures, while she helped him embrace his newfound ability to express his feelings. The night before their wedding, they broke tradition and spent it together in their apartment. Will had transformed their space into a romantic haven, with candles casting soft light and rose petals scattered across their bed. Grace emerged from their bathroom wearing a silk nightgown that made Will's heart race. The material clung to her curves, shimmering in the candlelight like liquid moonlight. Her shorter hair curled softly around her face, and her eyes sparkled with love and desire. "You're beautiful," Will said, his voice rough with emotion. He could hear her heartbeat quicken at his words, could see the flush spreading across her skin. Grace moved toward him like a dream, each step making the silk ripple around her body. Will felt his control slipping as she drew closer, the scent of her perfume mixing with the candlelight to intoxicate his senses. "I love you," she whispered, reaching for him. "I love who we've become together." Their kiss started soft, but quickly deepened as passion overtook them both. Will's hands slid over the silk covering Grace's body, feeling her warmth beneath the delicate material. Her sighs filled the candle-lit room as he worshipped her with touches and words of love. The nightgown slipped away easily, revealing sun-kissed skin that glowed in the flickering light. Will took his time, showing Grace exactly how much he desired her, how completely she had captured his heart. Their lovemaking was both tender and passionate, a perfect blend of their renewed connection. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both knew that tomorrow would mark the beginning of their greatest adventure yet. The morning of their second wedding dawned perfect and clear. They had chosen an intimate garden setting, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. The space was decorated simply but elegantly, with white roses and twinkling lights creating a romantic atmosphere. Grace wore a different dress this time, something sleeker, more modern, that emphasized her natural grace. When Will saw her walking toward him, his heart stopped for a moment before racing ahead at double speed. Their vows were everything their first ones should have been. Will spoke with passion and confidence, declaring his love for Grace in words that made her eyes fill with happy tears. He promised to always show her how much he loved her, to never again hide his feelings behind walls of reserve. Grace's vows were equally moving, acknowledging how they had grown together, how their love had transformed into something even more beautiful through their struggles. The reception was a celebration of their renewed love. Will surprised everyone by leading Grace in a passionate dance, showing off the skills he had been practicing in secret. Their friends and family watched in amazement as the once reserved man spun his wife around the dance floor with confident grace. As the evening drew to a close, Will swept Grace into his arms, carrying her toward their waiting car. She laughed in delight, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing kisses to his jaw. "Take me home," she whispered against his skin. The drive home was charged with anticipation. Will's hand rested on Grace's thigh, his thumb tracing patterns that made her breath catch. By the time they reached their apartment, both were trembling with barely contained desire. Will carried Grace across the threshold, just as he had done at their first wedding. But this time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. His kisses were passionate, his touches confident as he showed her exactly how much he wanted her. Grace's wedding dress joined his tuxedo on the floor as they made their way to their bedroom. In the soft light of the moon streaming through their windows, they came together with all the passion and love they had discovered in each other. Their second beginning was everything their first should have been: passionate, expressive, completely uninhibited. As Will turned off the lights, Grace's laughter turned to sighs of pleasure, filling their darkness with the sounds of love renewed. Their story had come full circle, transforming from a tale of quiet love to one of passionate expression. The shy accountant and the vivacious marketing director had found their perfect balance, creating a love story that would inspire others for years to come. In the darkness of their wedding night, surrounded by the evidence of their love, Will and Grace began their next chapter together, stronger, deeper, and more in love than ever before. Here's a meaningful reflection on the core lessons from this love story. Love requires both courage and expression. The story of Will and Grace teaches us that love isn't just about feeling deeply. It's about having the courage to show those feelings. Will's journey reminds us that keeping emotions locked away, even out of habit or fear, can damage even the strongest relationships. Key lessons from their story. 1. True love deserves to be expressed. Sometimes the people we love most deserve to hear and see how we feel, even if it takes us out of our comfort zone. 2. People can change for love, but the desire must come from within. Will's transformation wasn't just about becoming more expressive, it was about realizing that sometimes we need to grow to keep the people we love. 3. Second chances are possible when both people remain open to love. Grace never stopped loving Will's core nature, and Will never stopped loving Grace's vibrancy. This foundation allowed them to rebuild when they were ready. 4. Balance in relationships is crucial. Initially, Grace accepted Will's quiet nature while he admired her expressiveness. When this balance was lost, they struggled. They ultimately found a new balance that worked for both of them. Most importantly, the story shows that love isn't just about grand gestures or quiet devotion alone. It's about finding ways to make your partner feel cherished in the way they need. Sometimes, preserving love means stepping out of our comfort zone to meet our partner's emotional needs.